Okay, let's go ahead and move right into point number 10. The earliest extant Quran. And this is what we're really trying to get to. Where is this first Quran? Where is this first complete Quran, 114 surahs, that exactly parallels the Quran I have in my hand today? Where is that earliest manuscript? If none of these 6 are like this, if none of them are exactly like this, if the Sanam manuscript, the undertext and the lower text is not like this, if all the diacritical differences, the 93,000 diacritical differences in the 30, we suggest there are going to be, we've only found 32, but there will be 37 that we have that should be able to be found. So we have another 5 to go. If they are all so different with the Qiraat differences, then where is the first manuscript that actually supports this text, the one I have in my hand today? That's what we're looking at. Back in May 26th, a few months ago, I was here in London, and I was introducing a new book, this one here, called Corrections in the Early Quran Manuscripts. And I went down to Speaker's Corner, and Mansour Ahmed, who is well known at Speaker's Corner, but he is also responsible for the manuscript section of the Islamic Awareness website, the largest website, I think, anywhere in the world that houses all the earliest manuscripts. If you want to look at early manuscripts, you've got to go to Islamic Awareness website. So he is the one that is on that site. He does much of the writing on that site. So he was the best equipped to challenge what we were doing that day. And he did. He came, put his ladder right next to me, got up on the ladder, and we went at it for about 30 minutes. Now I'm going to show you a video that came from that day. Watch this video. It may be hard to understand because this is Speaker's Corner, but look at the claims he makes. He only lasted 30 minutes. I'm just going to show you 5 minutes because these were absolutely telling. Let's go see what he said while he was on the ladder.
Our Quran that we read today has a continuous textual tradition in our manuscript traditions. So now what we'll establish is this. The Quran, when we examine the manuscript traditions, bar those isolated errors, scribal errors, we have a robust tradition, orally and by written form, that the Quran we read today is the Quran that has been transmitted by our generations of Muslims from day one, from the Prophet ﷺ.
Okay, Mansour, real quickly, very quickly, before you leave, how far does that tradition go back to?
That is why.
How far does that tradition go back to?
Absolute certainty of our textual and oral transmission of the Quran. Because not
did you see? He's saying textual and oral.
it is also
Do you have a textual condition that goes back to 652?
Look,
Do you have a textual tradition that goes back to 652?
listen,
Yes or no?
any textual,
Does you have a textual all the way back to Uthman?
listen, any text of the Quran that you examine, any text. So when we examine the Quran in the manuscript traditions, we have almost 250,000 manuscripts of the Quran across the world in libraries.
You're not answering the question. Do they go back to Uthman? Do they go back to 652?
You are interrupting when I'm speaking.
Well, answer the question.
So, we have, from our textual tradition alone, more than 99% of the Quranic text from the first Islamic century.
Okay, explain when the first Islamic century goes to. It goes from 662 to 22 up to 721. So we're talking about the 8th century, am I correct?
If you go to IslamicAwareness.org, in which we have tabulated and shown Quranic manuscripts all around the world with references, which ones are carbon dated, which ones are polygraphically dated, you will see the amount of first century within Islam, first century Islam, the Quranic manuscripts that we have, you have 0%.
None of them are same with the current.
Okay, here we go. Have you heard the claim he has made? Mansour, do you have 114 surahs of the Quran in one manuscript that is from the mid-7th century? Yes or no?
No.
Do you have a complete Quran from the time of Uthman, 114 surahs in our hands today that we can look at?
Hang on.
Do you want an answer? Or do you want him to waffle on? No, you don't.
We have, at the moment, you must be a Christian, right?
Answer the question.
Do you want an answer to this? Okay, let's continue on. His answer is no, they do not have that. Do you have a complete Quran from the 7th century at all? Do you have a complete Quran that's 114 surahs from the same century that Muhammad lived? Yes or no?
As I said, from the 1st century of Islam.
The 1st century goes up to 721. That's the 8th century. So your answer is 8th century.
Are you gonna let me
Do you have a complete Quran by the 721?
Yes or no?
Yes or no?
Yes or no?
The guy
Silence.
who is demanding a complete Quran from...
You know, answering the question is yes or no.
Listen, let me respond to you in kind, right? If you examine the manuscript traditions of Jewish scripture...
We're not talking about Jewish scripture now. We're not talking about Jewish scripture. We're talking about Quranic scripture because we don't make this claim. Only the Muslims make this claim. It is the Muslim that just now said that we can go back to the 1st century of Islam, that's AH, which goes from 622 to 721, and that we can find a complete manuscript. Tell me where. Give me the name.
Did I not say? Of course, you did not listen to what I'm saying. That's why you need to...
Oh, you're going to change it now. So you don't have a manuscript.
Did I...
Do you have a complete manuscript in the 1st century of Islam?
Stop chicken.
Did I not say to
Oh,
you
come on.
that we have more than 97
Oh, it's not complete.
of the text of the Quran
It's
from
not
the 1st
complete.
century?
Which is not
Okay,
exactly
that's
the
all I
same
need to hear. Now, did you notice? He cannot claim a complete manuscript. He cannot claim because there is no complete manuscript. He wants to take it back to the 1st century AH. What he's not telling you is that almost every one of these manuscripts are from the 8th and 9th century. What we're looking at today are the earliest manuscripts. There is nothing earlier than the Pentapolitans. There is nothing earlier than the Topkapi. There is nothing earlier than the Sana manuscript. When you look at those manuscripts, how many variants do we have? Go ahead, Mansoor. Give us the number that Dan has found. We've been asking now for 1/2 hour.
Okay. Now, he made 2 claims there that we're going to talk about now. And this is why Speaker's Corner is the best place on earth, because you can get Muslims to make these claims on camera. There were over 20 cameras that heard those claims, and they all were live streaming, both Muslim cameras and others. All of that was, he should not have made 2 claims. Did you hear the 2 claims he made? First of all, we have a textual history that goes right back to Uthman. That's the problem. They have made this claim, and for 40 years I've heard this, that we are the only religion that has a revelation that goes back to its origins. You don't have the original Bible, we have the original Quran. This is what, have you all heard this? Did you not hear him say that? Now that is irresponsible of him to say that. So I confronted him quickly, and I gave him 3 options. Did you see 3 options I gave him? I said, do you have one that, first of all, I asked, do you have one from 652? He wouldn't answer. So I put it up to the 7th century, the same century that the Prophet lived. He wouldn't answer. He finally said, you're not listening to me. I said the 1st century AH. The 1st century AH goes from 622 up to actually 719. I gave him 2 extra years. 719 is the 8th century. So then I turned to him, I said, okay, 8th century, 721, do you have a complete manuscript by 721? What was his answer? And this is the second thing he should not have said. We have 97% of the Quran by 721. What do you think he meant by 97%? That's not 100%. So still they don't have a complete Quran almost 100 years after Muhammad that they can point to. Why haven't we asked this question before? Why aren't all of us asking this question? It's because of that we are now going to find out. I wanted to find out what he meant by 97%. I went on to Islamic Awareness website, and this is what we found. What they're talking about is a accumulation of many manuscripts by finding a little bit here, a little bit there, another bit over here. These are nothing more than fragments, most of them, A fragment here, a fragment there, another fragment here. They are come up by 719, which is the end of the first century of AH. That's 8th century. They can come up with 96. He said 97 because he was thinking maybe another percent by 721. That's nearly 100 years after Muhammad died. They cannot find a complete Quran. So what are these manuscripts they're looking at? There it is. This is from their website. 63 different manuscripts. Not one manuscript, but look how small they are. Some of them are just a few verses. Some of them are a few chapters. The biggest one is the OR 2165. That's the Ma'il manuscript, which is here in London. And that only goes up to Surah 43. But what they haven't done, and this is what we're going to introduce on Sunday, what they haven't done is they haven't looked at any of these. First of all, to see whether or not these actually correspond with this book or the dates for those manuscripts. They're claiming that all of them were before 719. Who gave those dates? And where did they get their conclusions? We've now looked at every one of those. And we now are going to introduce what we now know about those manuscripts. Most of them are not from even the 8th century. Some of them are from the 9th and 10th century. So not even that is correct. And this is the best they have got. Can you imagine if we said that about our Bible? That we have nothing at all of the New Testament that exists at all? But see, we are talking about papyrus. We're not even talking about parchment. They're talking about all of these are parchment, and we're only talking about 1,400 years ago. But see, we would never make that claim about our Bible, would we? Have you heard anybody make that claim about the Bible, that we have the originals, that we can go right back to the time when Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and when Paul did his letters? None of us would say we have their originals. But that's not what the Muslims are saying. Every one of the Muslims that we have talked to believe that their Quran has been complete from the time of Uthman, 652. They have yet to be showed what we're actually talking about. Now, if this is the case, what I want them to do, and I want Muslims to tell me, when therefore is the first extant manuscript of the Quran that equals this book right here, that parallels this book, and I have in my hand today? We're going to find out on Sunday what the Muslims are going to answer. How many of you know the answer to that? Does anybody here know where the first extant manuscript, that means a book that's in our hand, a manuscript that's in our hand, that we can look at, that is 114 surahs, and that parallels this book that I have in my hand here? Nobody? Okay, he's almost got it. Hold on to that, but even that's wrong. Hold on, we're going to answer that tonight. But we want to see what the Muslims come up with, because this to them is sacrosanct. No Muslim would dare believe what they're saying here. But this, what they're saying here, every Muslim is going to have to believe. Now let's continue on. There's no complete Quran for the first 100 years after Muhammad. The Muslims have had to collect 63 fragments of the Quran to find even 96% by 719. They have not studied them to know if their dates are correct. They have not studied any of them to know if they agree with the current 1924 Hafs text. Do any of them have variant readings? Do any of these have variant readings? Because if you even find one variant reading, then it's not like the book I have in my hand today. And why are they saying, therefore, that they can find a textual history that goes all the way back to Uthman? We're already 100 years from Uthman. Well, not quite 100 years. We're about 70 years from Uthman. Let's move on, because now we're going to get into the variant readings. And to get into the variant readings, you need to go to this book here. This is the book that just came out 2 hours before we got up on the ladder on that video you saw when we introduced this book. That's really playing it by the wire. It was finally published on May 26th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We got up on the ladder at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to introduce this book worldwide. It has got so much coverage now that this is a very technical book, but everybody should get it, because what Dr. Dan Brubaker has done, this is his doctoral thesis from 2010 to 2014. He did his doctoral thesis on manuscript variants, something the Muslims have refused to do. Muslims have always claimed that the Quran that we have in our hand today is exactly like the Quran that has always existed, has never changed. You saw all the quotes I did right at the very beginning of this talk. There has been no words changes, the same words, the same letters, even the same diacritical marks. You saw the quotes on the screen? Those are just some, a smattering of quotes. I could have given you hundreds of more. So he wanted to find out whether or not this is true, whether or not the manuscripts we have in our hands today, the earliest manuscripts, whether or not they are exactly like the Quran we have today. And so he was given permission to go. He went to the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, the Petropolitanus, the Husseini, and the Sana'a manuscript. He was given also permission to another 10 manuscripts beyond that. He went to all the earliest manuscripts, went to all the libraries and the earliest museums, got permission. He was the first person to go to these museums and libraries and take pictures, leaving through the page after page to look for corrections. He was hoping to maybe find 5, maybe 10. By the time he finished his doctorate in 2014 and received his doctoral thesis, because of this research, he had found 800 corrections. What kind of corrections was he looking at? Well, he was looking at insertions, words that were introduced above or below the line, in between lines. Erasers. Some of the erasers were overwritten. Coverings. Some of them were overwritten as well. Tapings. These are the 4 stages. What are we looking at? Well, here are some examples of some insertions. You can see where a word has been added up here. Here you have another word, al-sama, has been added there. These are insertions, possibly. These could be copyist errors. Then you have erasers. When you have erasers, these are not copyist errors because these are intentional changes. Here you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 of them right there on that page. Erasers overwritten, where they've erased it and they've written over top. So you can see both the lower and the upper text. In some cases, they've erased it and they've written with a completely different color, as you can see there. And then they have overwriting without erasers. Now, this one here are coverings. Can you see? As we're going to see, this one in the middle, this one is the most damaging, and that's from the Husseini manuscript, but we'll get to that, because what he decided to do is just take these coverings, erasers, tapings, insertions, and also erasers, and then he decided to put them into a book. Here's a tape that you can see. It looks like something's damaged there. So he went on the back side and found there was no damage whatsoever. It looks like they're actually trying to cover up that whole area. Let's look at these variants, and these are the ones that are found in this book. I encourage you to go buy it when it is shot right up to one of the most popular books on Amazon in the Islamic section, and it is a very technical book. But when you look at the first one, you can see here a huwa has been added. You can see it. It looks where the green arrow is. It is a huwa that has been added at a later date. It's written in a completely different nib. It doesn't change the meaning very much. In fact, you don't really need the huwa there. So why has it been added? The reason it's been added is so it now conforms to the 1924 Hafs text. That's this text that I have in my hand here. So obviously at a later date, someone had to add that in. Here you can see an eraser in the Petropolitanus manuscript, which is there in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. Allahum has been added, but it has been erased. The Allahu, which used to be there, to him, has now been changed to lahum, for them. Why? Well, obviously it's been made from singular to plural. Well, you can see that has a theological difference, but the reason it's been changed is not for that reason. It now corresponds to the 1924 Hafs text. Here's an example. Take a look at this. 9 different places where the name Allah, the name for God, has been added to the text. When they wrote this, they all forgot about God. How could you forget his name? You can see that they're written at a later time, in many cases with a completely different nib, and in every case you can see that they now change the text. You don't really need Allah in any of them, because it's understood it's Allah. So why did they write and add Allah every case? Because now it fits and it corresponds with the Hafs text. Here's a case in the Marcel II, which is the National Library in Russia. Surah 30, Ayah 9, where they've erased something, we don't know what they've erased, but it's in between 2 words, Akibatu, the fate, and Aladina, those. So why have they erased it? Well, now it corresponds with the Hafs 1924 text. Am I starting to sound like a broken record? In this case, this is the cover of the book. Here you have 4 corrections on one page. You have Alaihi, against him, has been written over an eraser in chapter 6, verse 93, way up there on the top right, following the words, Bima kuntum takulun, for what you used to say. Yet Alaihi is not in the 1924 text. what is number 2, which is out in the margins. Allah ila, Allah. So obviously they have changed it there, but they have forgotten to put the one that's in the margin where it should belong. So it would correspond with the 1924 text. In number 3, they've erased and then they've written over top of again the same word, Aladina hum, and then over here in number 4 down here, they've written the word Yahlamun, they know, has been written over an eraser. Why? In every case to correspond with the 1924 Hafs text. 4 corrections on one page. Here's also multiple post-production corrections. In this case, it's Surah 5. It's in the Doha manuscript, which is the Museum of Art there. There's an insertion of the phrase wa amilu al-salahat tuma attaku wa amilu. And you can see the amilu, the first wa amilu, the rest could have been a copyist error on the far right over there, which then had to be rewritten into the text. If you come down here, you can see the red aleph. The initial aleph of asanu, do good, was omitted. But when it was first written, it was then added later, but in red ink, a completely different ink to correct it at a later date. Here's another example of an insertion of the words the 7, al-sabi, the 7 heavens. Initially, the 7 wasn't there, it's just heavens. Why did they put the 7 heavens? Because that fits the Hafs text. It also has a theological difference. So here you can do an entire thesis right on this one correction as to why they had to incorporate that into that verse. Here's another example of an eraser with Allah's name that is overwritten. Allah has been overwritten over an eraser at that point. In this case, you see another insertion, the merciful Al-Rahim, which is in the Bismillah, and Allah is the forgiving. Again, the reason they had to add that in above the line is because it now corresponds with the Hafs text. Here's an interesting one, because here you can see that this is obviously, bimithli has been added at a later date. Take a look, it's sandwiched in between much larger letters. It has diacritical marks and it has vowelization, proving that this was added after these were already then created. Again, why did they have to add it there? Because now it fits and corresponds with the Hafs text. But at this time, you can see this is not a copyist error. This is an intentional insertion. Here's the Topkapi manuscript, Surah 66, Ayah 8, with the name Allah, which has been put on the margin to get Allah back in there again. Here's an eraser overwritten of the word bounty, Fadlin. You can see where they have erased it, but they haven't erased it completely, so you can still see the letters that were underneath it, and it's been replaced with just 2 letters. What's fascinating is we don't know what those 4 letters are underneath. It would be nice to know what they tried to erase to correct it. In this case, you have 2 different manuscripts, one from the National Library of Russia and the other one from the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and you have a eraser of Kala, he said, that has been changed to Kalu, both in Surah 34, Ayah 35. So in both cases, in 2 different manuscripts, they've erased it and replaced it with this, from the singular to the plural in the same verse, proving that this was wholesale done, not just with one manuscript, they were done on multiple manuscripts. Here's an eraser leaving gaps in the Topkapi manuscript in Surah 4, Ayah 167. Again, Allah's name is added there. Here's another case where you have an eraser leaving a gap. You can see there was quite a bit that was erased in that in chapter 24, 33. Why did they erase it, and what did they erase, and what was it that they was used to be there? We don't know. What we do know is what's left behind now corresponds with the 1924 Hafs text. Here's another case in the Husseini manuscript there in Egypt, Surah 4, Ayah 3. The word kana is, but it's missing most of the words. So it's obviously that this was added at a later date, again to correspond with the 1924 Hafs text. Here's an eraser overwritten involving the word name, Allah again, Surah 33, Ayah 9. There, in favor of Allah, you can see the word in favor of Allah has now been added there so that it fits the 1924 Hafs text. And in this case, the hour, Sabah, has now been added above the line in Surah 6, Ayah 40 in the Russian manuscript. The hour was added. Why? Because that's what's in the Hafs text. They had to put it in there to correspond with the Hafs text. Here's an eraser overwritten involving, again, Allah in chapter 34, verse 27 in the Russian library. And here's another one from the one in Doha. Eraser overwritten of nearly a full line. Can you see the eraser there where the green arrow is? That entire line has been erased and now has been written over top with the word risk, provision. What's fascinating, what is now remains corresponds with the 1924 Hafs text. This is the one I said I was going to show you. These are 8 coverings on one page. Look at every one of those arrows. Wherever you see a green arrow, they have covered the text. We can't even see. We don't even know what they covered. I would love to be able to pick up every one of them and see what they're covering. What has been left behind is difficult to read, but what has been left behind now corresponds with our present Quran, the 1924 Hafs text. And this is in chapter 2, verse 191 to 193. And the last one I'm going to show you is the last one that's in his book, and that's Surah 13, ayah 11 to 12. 3 different coverings on the same page. You can see very clearly where the covering is, and you can see it's then been replaced in chapter 13, verse 11 and 12, with in themselves and he who shows you. All the way down to the number 3 with and hope of 13, verse 12. In every case, by covering it and replacing with those words, it now corresponds with the 1924 Hafs text. So, have I said 1924 Hafs text enough time for you to get your appetite as to what I'm talking about? What is this 1924 Hafs text? How many of you know what I'm talking about? Okay, you know what it is. What is it?
I suppose what we would say was the gathering of our key religious leaders to decide what would be the ultimate version of the Bible. Obviously, for them, it came at that day. It was like a synod of decision.
Okay, a synod that gathered together, and what would you want them to do to find this final text? You would want them to go to the earliest one, right? And choose that. That's what we've done to the Bible. We've got manuscripts from we have about 24,000 manuscripts, and to find out what the original text is, you go and you compare all of them. 9,300 Latin versions, 10,000 Latin vulgates, 5,300 Greek manuscripts. You put them all together and you go back and you try to find out what would be the original text by comparing all of them. That's what you're supposed to do whenever you try to find the original text. Am I correct? Is that what happened in 1924? Does anybody know? Dr. Gabriel said Reynolds decided to find out, and this is what he found. 1924, in the city of Cairo, just one city, the city of Cairo, they were noticing that they could not do any standardized testing on any religious text because all the students were coming with many different answers. In fact, they were coming with about 37 different answers because they were referring to 37 different Qurans. There was a dilemma. How do you have standardized testing if you have so many different answers? So they went to Al-Azhar University and they asked Muhammad ibn Ali al-Huzayni al-Haddad, one man, not a whole synod. They asked one man, Muhammad ibn Ali al-Huzayni al-Haddad, if he would choose one of these 37 derivations. Now hold on a minute, who did he choose? He chose Hafs. Who in the world is Hafs? Hafs died in 796. Remember what I showed you before? He was from Iraq. He had never met Muhammad. He had never seen the original Quran. He was living 144 years after Muhammad. Do we even have Hafs text today? Do we have the original manuscript? No, we don't. So he only chose what he thought was Hafs. Once he chose that for Cairo, for the Cairo high schools, the education authority there in Cairo took all the other Qurans that disagreed, took them out into a boat, and threw them into the Nile River, which means they're still there today. But does that get rid of those variants? No. We've been able to find 32 of them, and just by looking in marketplaces in Jordan, Yemen, and Morocco. You can find them all over the Arab-speaking world. It became so successful in the city of Cairo that in 1936, the Egyptian government decided to make the Hafs text, this one that was chosen for Cairo, they decided to make that text the standard for all of the Egyptian schools. They call it the Farouk edition, named after King Farouk, who came to power in 1936. But that was only for Egypt. Finally, in 1985, King Fahd in Saudi Arabia saw how successful this was for Egypt, and therefore he decided that this Hafs text that had been chosen in Cairo in 1924, chosen in Egypt in 1936, he decided to make it the standard for the whole world. 1985. How many people were living in 1985? Raise your hands. Every one of you that have your hands risen, you are older than the Quran. The Quran we're using today has only been standardized, canonized for the entire world 34 years ago. Have you heard this before? Why haven't Muslims told us this? And the Hafs text that they chose in Cairo in 1924, in Egypt in 1936, and for the whole world in 1985 comes from one student that was created his own Quran in 796, 144 years after Muhammad. How much of that Quran differs from these earliest manuscripts? Now take a look. Remember, I just showed you 22. Guess how many Dr. Dan Brubaker has now found? Guess how many variants, how many corrections he has now found? Insertions, erasures, coverings. Anybody want to try a guess? In 2014, he had found 800. Guess how many he's up to now? Over 4,000. Over 4,000 corrections. And he still has many more to go yet. Now, why haven't Muslims told us this? And why have no Muslims done the work that Dr. Dan Brubaker has done? This is not his text. He is not a Muslim. He's an American doing his doctoral thesis. They have had these manuscripts for 14, 13, and 1,200 years. And yet in 1,000 years, no one has dared to ask the question Dr. Dan Brubaker asked. This is the first published text, and this is only 22. I've only showed you 22 of over 4,000. We have much more yet to research. Here's the question I'm going to leave with you. Take a look at every one of those corrections I showed you. Remember, I kept on saying, in every case, every time they inserted a word, or they erased some phrases here, or they covered these different portions. In every case, what was left behind was the Hafs standardized text. How can you insert? How can you erase? How can you cover unless you have a standard to apply it to? And when was the standard finally canonized? 1924? For Cairo, yes. But most of these manuscripts aren't in Cairo. They're in Russia. They're here in Britain. How in the world were they able to know what to erase, what to cover, and what to insert? I'm not going to answer that. I want to hear Muslims answer that. I want to know how is it that they were able to standardize all of these manuscripts, and why is it they were so clumsy that they left the eraser so we could see them? Proving that in every case, they have censored the text. What this shows me, and let's now conclude, what modern Muslim scholars claim is not what early Muslim scholars believed. Historical anachronisms prove the writers of the Quran didn't know their history very well. Many of the stories in the Quran were borrowed, yet they used the wrong sources. The two compilations, that from Abu Bakr and Uthman, prove that men changed the Quran in its earliest period. The 6 manuscripts prove that men created 6 different Qurans between the 8th and 9th centuries. The 2 layers of the Sana'a manuscript prove that men created a nascent Quran in the 7th century, washed it, and then rewrote it. The 4 carbon-dated lab reports prove that men borrowed stories created long before the Quran. The 32 different Arabic Qurans prove that men, even today, still read a variety of Qurans. The 63 fragments employed to find just 96% of the Quran proves that they still don't have the original. The 4,000 consonantal variants prove that they are possibly still changing and standardizing the text. And the 36 non-Hafs Qirat variants dumped into the Nile prove that when Muslims find problems with their Quran, they either burn them, wash them, erase them, cover them, or sink them to destroy the evidence. Finally, from what we have researched tonight, we can say, firstly, that the Quran was not created by God at all. The Quran was not sent down to Muhammad between 610 and 632. The Quran was not completed by Uthman in 652. The Quran was changed enormously in the last 1,300 years. The Quran was finally compiled in 1924 and made official in 1985. Therefore, the Quran is 34 years old. Consequently, many of us in this room are actually older than the Quran. Yet, by casting doubt on the Quran, our Muslim friends can now consider a much better book, a bigger book, the Bible. Come on home. Now, before we go to questions, I do just want to advertise we do have a course that where you'll be learning all of this. This is a course. This is the fifth year that we have been using it. We do not ask you to come to any place. We come to you. We come to your laptop. We do this by Zoom webinar. It's about to start in just a week or two. And on the 17th of September, every Tuesday from 2 to 4, we put our lectures up, and you can watch them on your laptop. You don't have to go live to watch them. You can pull them down the next day or at your leisure to watch them at your own heart's content. They are 24 courses. The first module looks at theological comparisons. Those are starting at 17th of September up to the 22nd of October. Then we go into the historical critique starting on the 5th of November up to the 10th of December. Then we start the next year in January looking at textual and theological critique. This lecture is part of that, and the one last night would be part of the second module, and that goes up to the 18th of February. And then we end with mission and social implications from March to the 7th of April. Thank you for your time, but now we need to open it up to questions. Are there any questions on what I've said here or other questions you may have?
Hi, Jay.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. We've talked about Hafs. Is Hafs a trustworthy person?
The question is, was Hafs even a worthy person? And what you're referring to, Sarah, is the problem that Hafs was not considered to be worthy at all. In fact, many consider him to be, there have been many words given to him which I won't repeat here. But he was not one of the best of those 37 that were the students from those 5 different cities. Nonetheless, remember, even with Hafs, we're only talking about qira'at differences. It's the razm that I'm most interested in. I hope you all pick that up. Whether you use Hafs or don't use Hafs, what is most damaging are that last material that we looked at, those corrections. The fact that every one of those corrections had nothing to do with dots, had nothing to do with vowels, they had to do with the consonantal text. When you change the consonantal text, it could be Al-Duri, it could be Hafs, it could be Jazi, it could be any one of the others of the 37. The fact that they chose Hafs is rather puzzling because Al-Haddadi has not told us why he chose that text. It looks like either he had conferred with other his scholars, but we do not know why they chose that text. But if you're going to choose a text, for heaven's sakes, go back to the original razm. And that's the dilemma. There was no original razm. Can you see the dilemma that they had? So most of you, when you talk about what you've heard tonight, and you say there have been corrections, there have been changes, most Muslims will tell you that this has nothing to do with real changes. This is only to do with dots and vowels. What we showed you tonight is not to do with dots and vowels. This is to do with the consonantal text. Hafs is nothing more than just a student who had his own derivations of where those dots should go. Nothing more. Thanks for the question. Not as many questions tonight as there were last night. Yes, you have a question. Thank you so much. For those of you who didn't hear what she said, it's very important that though this material is going to be devastating for an awful lot of Muslims, it has to be. Put yourself in their shoes. How would you feel if you heard what you heard tonight? We opened it up. Muslims were permitted to come here. They are going to hear this on Sunday. They certainly will hear it on the internet. And I don't know what your name is, but what's your name? Rebecca is asking that we need to be careful how we not only transfer or say this in public, but what our mood and what our attitude is with the Muslims we say it to. Remember, We're not attacking Muslims with this. Please don't ever attack a Muslim with this. We're confronting the Quran. We're using what we call redacted criticism, source criticism, historical criticism. We're using the same criticisms that were applied to the Bible. And that's why, for heaven's sakes, when you introduce this to a Muslim, continue to love the person in front of you. I find them to be the most easy people to love because they have a passion for their God, their book, their prophet that I wish we would have. And they teach me how to love Jesus Christ and how to love my Bible. What we are introducing tonight and what we introduced last night has nothing to do with Muslims. It has everything to do with the narrative that Islam has been giving us. The only narrative that we have ever been given, and that is that has always been one man who received a book from 610 to 622, and then that book has never changed, though it was written down 20 years later. That's the narrative we've always been told. Thank God that we are now finding a different narrative. How we say it and who we say it to must always be enveloped with the love of Jesus Christ. Can you remember to do that? It's a good way to end. Thank you so much, Rebecca.